Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to be able to introduce our next speaker. A native of Miami, Anthony Abraham Jack began his educational journey with Head Start. Later in life, he received a scholarship to attend Gulliver Prep, an elite private high school in South Florida. He went on to receive his bachelor's from Amherst College, double majoring in women's and gender studies and religion, and his master's and PhD in sociology from Harvard University. He is currently a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows, an assistant professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and the Shutzer assistant professor at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. His research documents the overlooked diversity among lower income undergraduates, the doubly disadvantaged, those who enter college from local, typically distressed public high schools, and the privileged poor, those who do so from boarding, day, and preparatory high schools. His scholarship appears in The Common Reader, the Du Bois Review, Sociological Forum, and Sociology of Education, and has earned awards from the Association of American Publishers, American Sociological Association, American Educational Studies Association, Association for the Study of Higher Education, Eastern Sociological Society, and the Society for the Study of Social Problems. Tony held fellowships from the Ford Foundation and the National Science Foundation, and was a 2015 National Academy of Education Spencer Foundation Dissertation Fellow. The National Center for Institutional Diversity at the University of Michigan named him a 2016 Emerging Diversity Scholar. The New York Times, Boston Globe, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The Chronicle of Higher Education, The Huffington Post, The Nation, American Conservative Magazine, The National Review, Commentary Magazine, The Washington Post, The Hetchinger Report, Financial Times, Times Higher Education, Vice, Vox, and NPR have featured his research and writing, as well as biographical profiles of his experiences as a first-generation college student. The Privileged Poor, How Elite Colleges Are Failing Poor Students, which was awarded the 2020 Mira Komarovsky Book Award, 2019 C.P. Mildred Garcia Award, Jr. for Exemplary Scholarship, and the Thomas J. Wilson Memorial Prize, and also named an NPR Book's Best Book of 2019, is his first book. Other fun facts: Tony is a huge Harry Potter fan. He's a Ravenclaw, of course. He's a novice knitter and a lover of short stories. It is my sublime pleasure to invite Tony Jack to the virtual stage to speak here for SACAC. Tony?
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for that generous introduction. I mean, we've known each other for more than a decade, and I think that's the first time I think I've ever heard you call me by my real name. It was actually kind of scary. It felt like I was in trouble or something. And I wasn't expecting the knitting and the other little factoids. But thank you all so much for allowing me to join you all today. It is. I wish we were in person. I get so much out of these conversations and the ability to be able to learn from you as much as I'm sharing my research. And we have a limited time together today. And so one thing that I actually want to do is I want to hear directly from you. So I have a few opening remarks that I would like to begin with, but I want to turn this into more of a 3-act play where I give some open remarks, hear directly questions from the SACAC team, and then open it up to questions from the audience, because I think that'd be most fruitful for our time together. So let us jump right in. I'm a sociologist interested in how poverty and inequality shape the life chances of children and youth, and that is at the heart of my research. I just happen to study this process at the college level. Because although first generation and lower income undergraduates make up roughly 50% of the students at 4-year schools, just 14% of the undergraduates at the most competitive colleges come from the bottom half of the income distribution. Instead, those from lower income families are disproportionately relegated to community, for-profit, and less selective colleges where resources are fewer and graduation rates are lower. This contrast is made even more striking when you consider that 38 colleges in America have more students from the top 1% than the bottom 60%. To put it a different way, there are more students whose family come from making more than $680,000 a year compared to those who make less than 60. At Washington University in St. Louis, the ratio of wealthy students to low-income students is almost 4-to-1. This disparity is especially troubling given that selective colleges like Amherst and Harvard, Michigan, and UVA serve as mobility springboards for those from disadvantaged families compared to lower tier schools. Because here's the problem, those from poor families were once kept out of these bastions of privilege by a devilish duo. We were excluded by lack of information on the one hand and tuition costs that rivaled or even eclipsed our family's annual incomes on the other. And some colleges took action. Beginning with Princeton in 1998, colleges began enacting no loan financial aid policies to combat the class inequalities that have a stranglehold on our delicate democracy and even more fragile system of higher education. Through these initiatives, colleges reached out to say that money will no longer be a barrier to entry. It will no longer curtail your success. And many colleges were awarded and praised for these actions, even getting a $1 million grant for the, quote, most diverse place. But uncritically praising universities as democratic institutions reflects a limited civic imagination. An admission letter and generous financial aid do not a diverse college make. Access ain't inclusion. I worry if colleges have extended coveted invitations to excited youth before adequately preparing for their arrival. Because we've seen and forgotten an old truth, that citizenship is so much more than just being in a place. It is about accessing all the rights and privileges pertaining thereto. Now, this is something that I not only studied, but that I lived. Because I remember the first question I remember asking myself at Amherst College back in 2003, it was, where are the other poor Black folks? Because I was invited to partake in what I call now those convocation conversations. And y'all know those chats I'm talking about when people work in the stories behind their passport stamps. Because my new peers were swapping stories of multi-week trips abroad and fancy parties hosted at second homes. Hell, my first time on a trip was actually traveling from Miami to Amherst for my recruiting adventure. You see, what I thought I found that day was the legacy of Bowen and Bach's groundbreaking study, The Shape of the River. You see, in this work, they found that contrary to stereotype, the majority of Black students at elite colleges were from very privileged backgrounds. The sons of lawyers, the daughters of doctors, the children of commerce. I resigned myself to be, yet again, the only poor Black person in a rich white place. Yet, imagine my surprise when one of my classmates who studied abroad in Spain during her junior year, as she was retelling this story, then revealed that she also came from a family that barely made ends meet. Feeling comfortable with each other, we shared stories of doing homework by candlelight. And now we did this not to be romantic, but rather because the power was out. We knew an old reality all too well that sometimes there was more month than money. The vacation homes my new peers ventured to, it turned out, were not always their own, rather those of their wealthy high school peers. But here's the problem. Like my freshman imagination, social science research and reporters who cover higher education did not make space for the totality of experiences within the first generation college student narrative. When they wrote about lower income students, they wrote of a single experience chronicling culture shock and isolation. Yet all the while, as my research was the first to uncover, colleges were hedging their bets. They were getting their new diversity from old sources, the Andovers, the Exeters, the Deerfields, the St. Paul's, the Choates of the world. So I set out to trouble the waters. In my book, The Privileged Poor, I focus on life at an elite university in the Northeast that adopted no loan financial aid policies. And I sat down with 103 Black, white, and Latinx undergraduates and conducted ethnographic observation for 2 years to investigate what it's like to be a student at a rich university. But more importantly, I wanted to ask the question, what does it mean to be a poor student on a rich college campus? And I highlight how lower income students live ever more divergent lives en route to college. I explored the experience of those who live in poor, segregated neighborhoods, but enter college from elite boarding day and preparatory high schools like Menlo, those who I call the privileged poor. And I compare their experiences to those who come from economically distressed, lower income students who come from typically distressed public schools, those who I call the double disadvantage. Now, admittedly, these terms are loaded, and to be honest with you, my choice in terms is purposeful. In addition to the oxymoronic quality of privileged poor that sticks with you, to even find fault with the term forces you to engage with the question, how can someone be both privileged and poor? Even using the qualifier doubly inspires an intersectional way of thinking when there previously wasn't one. But I also wanted to use these terms to push us beyond individual differences and focus on how structural inequalities like segregation and poverty and the disinvestment in public K-12 education manifest themselves in college. You see, conventional wisdom dictates you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. When it comes to understanding the undergraduate experience, the same sentiment is true. We must examine where students come from and what they have been through to understand why they chart the path they do once they reach the college gates. Something that you all who help students get to college know a little bit better than those who receive them. Because doing so forces us to think about how school policies can hinder their progress. Because I ask questions, which students immerse themselves into the college community? Who wants to leave after the first week? Who says of their experience, I couldn't breathe here? Who likens their college to deja vu? To overlook this rich diversity of experiences among lower income students is then to base policy on only a partial picture. For example, colleges expect students to be comfortable and proactive in forging relationships with faculty from the moment they set foot on campus. This is the road to extensions, help, recommendation letters, internships. This is the road to emotional support when times get rough. Yet this expectation remains unsaid. There's no manuals of do's or don'ts, whens or hows. And unspoken, if undergraduates want something, they will ask for it, operates as the gold standard. The college corollary to the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Imagine the culture shock then that some first generation college students experience navigating this hidden curriculum. Alice, a quick-witted Latina with a penchant for short answers, attended a segregated public high school. Her 4 years before college was filled with peers fighting, setting trash cans on fire, and skipping school. For her teachers, maintaining order took precedence teaching lessons. She doesn't feel at home at Renown. She says, everything contradicts my life back home, the people, the culture, the very buildings I pass on the way to class every day. Professors informally say, my door is open, but she doesn't believe them. She feels, quote, too intimidated, too afraid to talk to people, and consequently rarely goes to school sponsor people for anything. But in contrast, Agun, a reflective Latina, hails from a troubled neighborhood also, but attended an affluent boarding school with a $212 million endowment. Her largest class was 12 students, and contact with teachers who often had PhDs was an everyday occurrence both inside and outside the classroom. Office hours were built into the very culture and structure of the school. She said to me, I feel empowered to go and talk to a professor and say, hey, I want to meet with you. She goes on to say, Tony, my school instilled in me that I'm allowed to do that. It's actually my right. Even when her instructor was away from campus, Agun had no qualms calling his cell phone for virtual prearranged office hours, despite many surprised looks from her friends. You see, what was new for Alex was old for Agun. What was a mismatch for one was a match for the other. These differences are not the differences between Alex and Agun, but rather the differences in what they were able to practice, let alone master before arriving on campus. But colleges mistakenly, erroneously, see Agun as engaged and Alice as doing just fine. Moreover, colleges reward students accordingly. One graduate advisor shared with me that when it comes to nominating students for awards and different prizes, she says, quote, the process is relationship dependent, unfortunately. Oftentimes, the best candidate is not put forward. It's hard to tease out what is meritocracy and what is nepotism, favoritism, cronyism, or whatever you want to call it. Undergraduates from America's forgotten neighborhoods and ignored schools are truly disadvantaged if colleges continue to privilege. But I am not so naive. Knowing how to navigate social relationships with faculty and deans is not the only hurdle that lower income students face. There are things that no amount of cultural capital can combat. Where Alice and Agun experiences align Their shared economic disadvantage is more salient in shaping their sense of belonging and overall well-being. You see, walking around campus in March, one usually hears trips of home for rest, Europe for backpacking, and Mexico for partying. Spring break, however, means something totally different for lower income students. Valeria tells me, she said, there's always famine during spring break. And don't get me wrong, Alice and Agun both know hunger sting all too well, and not just when food stamps ran out at home. You see, their college assumes that all students depart campus for fun in the sun. And so Renown closes all eateries during spring break. These closures result in 1 out of every 7 students having to fend for themselves during recesses. I want you to think about that for 1 second. At one of the wealthiest universities in the world, 1 out of every 7 students must face combat food insecurity, and they can chart it on their calendar without fail. Closures, sadly, are a common practice. Of the nearly 80 colleges that have adopted no loan financial aid policies, so those who are ostensibly the most progressive when it comes to aid, when I was doing this research, only 1 in 5 kept their dining halls open without fail. When one's pocket is as empty as one's stomach, you are more worried about your next meal than recounting trips to the Hamptons. Nicole shared with me, she said, spring break is the most blatant break where privilege and wealth play a part in whether you leave or whether you stay. Maria asked a simple question with a tough answer. How can you support yourself when you can't feed yourself? Capturing this harsh reality with comedic seriousness, Ariana says, quote, spring break is the real Hunger Games. But just how close it comes to living in the districts is downright depressing. At a conference where students from all over the country discussed what it meant to be a first-generation college student, one young white woman with a pixie haircut wearing a Columbia University sweatshirt stood brave in a room full of people to discuss spring break. She revealed after standing up how she spent her last spring break at one of the wealthiest universities in the country. She increased her online dating activity in the weeks leading up to spring break to secure dates the following week. You see, banking on gender norms of older men paying for the first date, she felt that her only option was to use OkCupid as if it were DoorDash, Tinder as if it were Grubhub. In order to eat, she offered her time. But this makes no sense. Yet this is life for far too many undergraduates. Furthermore, this reality goes beyond just what poor students face. What about those who don't have a home to go to? Or what about those who know that home and harm are synonymous? New students require taking on new responsibilities. We must move as colleges and also those who help colleges select their next class. We must move from access to inclusion. We must ensure that social class does not keep lower income students in secondary positions at first-rate institutions. To embark upon the crucial task of making colleges look more like the world and not just the top 1%, we must question what we take for granted. As each class becomes ever more diverse, colleges' connections to once overlooked communities become more pronounced. And these new ties bring various inequalities into sharper and sharper relief. It is my hope that the privilege poor not only sheds light on the problems at hand, but also provides a framework for addressing them. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Tony. That was great. We've got a couple questions coming in from the audience, and we encourage you to continue to submit them. We want to hear from Tony and hear his thoughts on what you took away from the book and your questions. The first question that I think we should start off with is, someone would love to know more about the responses that you've seen to the book. If you feel that important changes are coming because of what you've researched and written, or what you think needs to happen and more quickly.
That's a good question. I have been tracking it a little bit, and it's been an ongoing process. I am happy to report that many more institutions are addressing food insecurity on their campuses, and many people across the country who are professors and members of staff and administration are making office hour statements on their syllabi, on their office, on their websites, and even their public profiles. Many people also like put the slides up in the first day of class. People have walked their students to their office to give them an understanding where they are. And so there are some things that have been going on, like very, very tangible, like I don't want to say quick, because quick implies not a big impact. And that's not, there were actions that could be immediately taken to reduce the inequality on campus. And many people have embraced them. And that has been something that I have truly benefited from witnessing.
Awesome, thank you. Another question. How does a doubly disadvantaged student go from surviving to thriving at these elite institutions that were not designed for them?
Oh, wow. It requires an institution actually doing some damn work, to be honest with you. The reason why I always ask college presidents and the question in the way that I do is, what else do you take for granted? Because I want them to take a moment to think about how their customs, rituals, and expectations, just how classed and racialized they are, right? Because many of these, the kind of rituals and customs and traditions that colleges have were made when colleges were all male, all white, all of the same class, even if not all wealthy, right? And so you're trying to hold on, you're bringing the past in the name of continuity without actually addressing the ways your campus has fundamentally changed. And so the thing is, for me, I'm not trying to make a whole bunch of lower income students feel comfortable around rich people. If I had to put my money where my policies are, I'm more concerned with getting students access to institutional resources. I'm going to try to put students into office hours. I'm going to try to put students into mental health services, career services, study abroad. And so introducing them to not only what those offices are, but also to an understanding of why they should go and why they should go early. That to me is how I get a student to thrive.
Thank you. Sorry, my office phone rang. Just real-time virtual conferences. Next question. Do you recommend that the responsibility for knowing the terrain of the campus lies with the high school, the college, both?
It relies on it. I would say it falls on the high school. And I say that because it's terribly unfair that the way in which funding is done in public K-12 education especially is just so drastically unequal that it just doesn't make sense. For example, in America, there's a $23 billion difference in funding between predominantly white and predominantly non-white school districts, right? How do you can't, I don't care how good a teacher is, that is that unmovable mountain, right? $23 billion. Think about what that means. That's, if it were a college, it would come second in endowment only to Harvard, right? Think about our institutions, $23 billion. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't great teachers, because there are amazing teachers. Many of the doubly disadvantaged don't make it to college without an amazing teacher. I'm just saying, look, let's talk about the social reality. So it falls on colleges and on high schools to do this kind of work. But really, the responsibility should be the way in which the state and the country funds public education, and what colleges must do to educate the current student body population, and not just the very privileged sliver of the top 1% who they attract because of prestige, all that kind of stuff like that, right? And I say that also because everyone wants to say, it's only Harvard, it's only Princeton. No, if you look at the demographics of UVA, Michigan, Duke, WashU, Berkeley, Stanford, USC, like there are pockets of money across all these universities, but what is consistent across all of them is the privileging of privilege, right? So I don't want to say it is a high school responsibility, because the high school responsibilities are already social worker, care worker, aide, counselor, teacher, all that rolled into one, because we have disinvested in public education so much. So I'm not trying to, I don't want to say like, oh yes, it's the high school responsibilities to do this and what they're already doing, but it does fall on them. The question is, how do we narrow the gap between, especially our public education and our colleges and universities, because that is where it is very wild.
Thank you. The next question is a hot take. So someone asks, what's wrong with first-gen students like me seeing university as transactional rather than relational or transformational? We need the credential. I didn't attend Yale because I knew it wasn't for me. Education should transform the student, not vice versa. Why do you insist on changing elite institutions?
Because you, I'm not, it's a great question. I love the way the person put it. One, for those of you who traveled abroad, everybody knows that you don't, or at least everybody tells you, don't get the money while you're here, get the money while you're there, because you get more bang for your buck. And I would say it's the exact same thing. To get the biggest reward from this transactional relationship, it makes it much easier. It makes it much more, you get more bang for your buck if the hidden curriculum is more explicit. Because, for example, it can be 100% transactional. But if you go to Amherst or Yale or Harvard and you wait until your junior year to go to the Office of Career Services to get help on your resume and get a higher paying internship that directly leads into a job, are you getting as much from that transactional issue? I'm not trying to say everybody should be your BFFs. No, to hell with that. Like, I don't like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is to get the most out of these universities, to make these universities, to make every dime of that endowment work for you. It is about making sure you develop a network of people who think about you when you are and when you are not in the room. Right? Getting nominated for the Rhodes, you need upwards of 8 letters of recommendation. You could approach the Rhodes as a very transactional thing. I want the most prestigious fellowship an undergraduate can get. I'm 100% in agreement with that. But if you don't have 8 people who can write on your behalf, you're not going to get it. And then even if you do have 8 people and they all say the same thing, this person is very smart. They took my class and got a good grade, as compared to this person is very smart, they're driven, they came to office hours, they asked great questions, they came and worked for my lab. I trusted this person so much that when I was on leave for a semester, they took care of my house or they took care of my cat. You can be very transactional with a lot of aspects of the undergraduate experience. And I'm not trying to say you shouldn't. But what I am saying is it's more taxing when you are taxed more on the return to that transaction when you don't know the hidden curriculum. Unlike your wealthy peers who come in and go to office hours from day one. I'll give you an example of exactly what I'm talking about. I was talking to the director of the career services at the time of my project, and a student came in the first month of the school year and told her, I want to work for the White House this summer, and that's what I'm going to do. And the person was just like, okay, that's, but and they said, it's very hard to get a White House internship. And the young woman responded, oh, my uncle works for Vice President Biden's chief of staff. And you think it's like, well, you already got an in. You already have the connection, the very familial connection, and you have the resources, but you are that person who's going earlier to cross every T and dot every I, let alone other things that you're going to be applying for, right? Versus the other student who doesn't come in and doesn't know the full range of possibilities, the full range of resources that the university provides. And now I'm thinking in the proactive sense, but what about in the protective sense? Who feels comfortable going to get mental health services? Who knows that their financial aid will fully cover it and do everything like that? Those are the type of questions that we need to answer. And that's why even if you take a very transactional approach, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, it still requires it still requires sorry, it still be made better and more profitable to you if you know the rules.
Thank you. That makes sense to me. Another question. As counselors, what can we do to empower students to have exposure and experience of that cultural and social capital so they can transition more successfully to higher ed?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to, and this is where that explanation comes from and demystifying the hidden curriculum. I think it's important for us to explain some of this to students and explain that the rules are different. That making one's needs known is expected in college, that it is not a burden on people, that the way in which you develop relationships are going to look different. Whereas you saw me on campus for 2 or 3 years before you felt really comfortable with me to talk to me, it moves a little faster in college. They have this thing called office hours, and you're supposed to go there and you're supposed to talk about this. And it's not always you have to have a perfect question, right? It's like demystifying stuff like that. I think that's what counselors can do, because that trust is there. And also, you all are in an incredibly powerful position where you know that something that I'm trying to remind colleges: students don't come to college, families come to college. And so if you can also begin the process of bringing families along, that could be incredibly important, because students often find themselves being torn between two worlds, right? Do I listen to my family's advice because they've been my day ones from the beginning, who's worked their butt off to get me here? Or do I listen to the people at college who have the degrees, the titles, the experiences, and all that kind of stuff that I want to have one day? Who do I listen to? And so being able to bring families along so that they too understand that things are changing a little bit, that can be incredibly important.
Thank you. Another question. As a staff member of a 4-year public college, I have observed that it's been a challenge for our college to be more diverse. Even if we recruit diverse students, very few enroll because they don't see other students like themselves. What are your thoughts and your advice?
The thing is, here's the hard part. Without us, I make this joke, and I talked about it I use it in my TED talk, where I'm like, there are only 3 Ivy League schools: Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. And the only reason why Princeton is on the list is because of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Right. The way in which so many schools that offer so much to students, especially from those from working class and lower income backgrounds, just are not on the radar. And so how do you break in? And sometimes it's through partnering with a program, whether it's, and I'm not endorsing any of them, I'm just saying they're out there, whether it's partnering with places like Prep and TEAC and ABC, whether it's partnering with Posse, or different scholarship programs that directly recruit the students you want to have. That is one way of gaining entry into communities that otherwise you don't have access to. But oftentimes it's definitely about the money, right? It's about the money and financial aid, and also explaining to students, cause I know a lot of people, I'm originally from Florida, and I know a lot of people thought that, oh yeah, if you leave Florida, you'll pay more money. And I actually pay, I can't even tell you how much the difference between what I would have had to pay to stay in Florida than to go to Amherst. It's about, again, that family connection too, is figuring out ways you can break into communities. But that's what first comes to mind. especially the partnerships, because then you already have had somebody vouch for you.
Thank you for that. Another question from someone who loved your book, like many of us. Fascinating topic, dynamic research. This person works for a small CBO that provides scholarships to help send those you would call doubly disadvantaged to college, and they also counsel them through it. This past year and the response to COVID has put a spotlight on the lack of support for low-income students. As campuses closed, there seemed to be an expectation that all students had a home to go back to, another source of meals and money for all of the related expenses, travel, storage supplies, etc. Can you speak to any conversations that are being had or anything being done to support low-income students through times of transition like this? Are colleges paying attention?
They are and they aren't. I think they're also thinking that they can pay their way out of this pandemic. And that's just not the case, because some of the problems that students are facing are so entrenched that it's just not, again, not something that they can simply pay their way out of. I was happy that many colleges that I visited started a reading group among senior staff to talk about the issues that students were facing. So they read the book and realized oh shoot, we didn't know this. Let's start talking about it, and maybe we can address it. That put them like 2 steps ahead of the pandemic. Don't get me wrong, the pandemic hawked them down and like outpaced their efforts. But the fact that they were even thinking about it, they were more nimble than they were. Instead of being caught, on their back foot, they were at least, thinking about it and moving towards the direction. So that was actually something that that I felt that scared me, to be honest with you, because to have a president call you and say, "Hey, what should we do?" is, you're like, I'm an academic. Like I haven't assumed the deanship or presidency yet, right? Like it's that. But the fact that people were thinking about internet and starting to scramble to provide those very things, that was something that was very, very positive and thinking about. But to be honest with you, so my next book project was supposed to be on working in college, but now it's going to be on the inequalities that COVID exacerbated. It's not a book on COVID, but the exacerbation of the inequality that many students were already facing. That's what the next project is. And so, I mean, the type of topics, from mental health to housing and food insecurity to, there's just, the fact of the matter is, we are opening in the fall, many colleges across the country, and we're just not ready. We're only scratching the surface of the kind of pain that students are dealing with. If every college right now isn't doubling the number of mental health services providers and partnering with everybody locally, they're setting themselves up for failure. And so it's not the economic hurdles that are going to be the biggest and the most debilitating for students. It's going to be the social.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing that at the high school as well. And I hope that we continue to have the resources to provide those resources to students, because it's incredibly important. I know that you and I have chatted about your comment in the New York Times article about college essays and how students are sometimes, I'll let you use the phrase you use, but encouraged to kind of speak to their pain and to the disadvantage in order to kind of reach the hearts and minds, I guess, of admissions officers. And if you want to chat a little bit about what prompted you to say that and your experience with college essays and trauma.
Yeah, I knew I was going to get in trouble a little bit, not in trouble, good trouble. Because I said that, college, the application process in and of itself pushes students to pimp out their poverty to get access into good schools. Because quite frankly, and it plays on stereotypes, like to be Black, you are encouraged to write about something bad that has happened to you. If you're white, you are more encouraged to talk about something that expanded your horizon. And if you are Asian, it's like talking about, how you are more than just math and science. Like, it's like there's a script that we are forced to put people in, so that now if you're Black and middle class, it's like, oh, my uncle was poor though, so I know what poverty looks like. Or if you're Asian and you do like science, you're like, you have to be like, oh, but look, I'm also artsy because I do this. And so like we're forced to kind of like typecast our race and then figure out how the hell that we fit in. And that was more of a dig at college admission officers than college counselors and guidance counselors, because it was just important to me to, I don't know, that was the most personal public piece of writing I've ever done. And it was so hard to write because I was just like, I like using my student stories, and I was trying to remove myself from the center of the conversation. But then in writing, I was just like, no, there's a whole bunch of hurt. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this process that is unequal. And then there are some things that are both unequal and unfair. And that one, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that inequality is fair. What I'm saying is just like, there's something malicious in its almost in its intentionality. No, tell your story. Like, but no, not that one, not the one that you play chess, not the one that you, though I bet you $5. There's gonna be a lot of like, I play chess because of Queen's Gambit coming out. But just if you like, the worst story will get you into the best school, and why is that?
Thank you, Tony. I think we're going to wrap up the Q&A, but I wanted to ask before I throw it to Sarbeth, who's going to transition us into the next part of our conference. Is there anything that you want to say to all these educators that you have listening to you right now? Any, last takeaway that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I would encourage your students to really consider what it means to never ever be afraid to ask for help. I say that because help seeking is seen in many communities as a sign of weakness, when in life, and especially in college, seeking out support is a sign of strength, right? It is an invaluable skill set that once you practice, hone, and master, it opens so many doors for you by itself, and then also gives you the power and the practice of opening the doors yourself, right? That is something that I would love for students to practice more and more before they get to college, so that if they do need that extension, they're ready and willing to ask for it. But also, if they want that job in a professor's lab, they're also equally ready and willing to ask for it, right? Because help seeking is not about just, oh, can you teach me, this epsilon delta proof? No, it's about securing the support that you need to do the things that you want, whether it's transactional or transformational. It's about how do you secure the bag, whatever you want in that bag, whatever it is you need, that you're going for, that you're gunning for, that's where you should be.
Thank you, Tony, so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to get to share you with my profession and to get to interact with you during the conference. So thank you again so much for sharing your time. I know you're a busy man.
Yeah, no, thank y'all for having me.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for coming and watching and listening and hopefully learning. I'm going to throw it to Sarbeth, who's going to kind of transition us to the next sessions for the conference. And thank you again, Tony.